This paper, I guess I should apologize to the fourth co-author. I omitted it. So this paper has many moving parts, so it's a little bit difficult to figure out what's going on. Maybe it's something that has happened to me. I can't understand triple interactions very well. But in any case, there are three moving parts. One is some companies have ownership stakes by public pension funds, which are pensions offered by federal, state, and other sort of local levels of US government. Then there is this court ruling, the Citizens United. So I asked my esteemed colleague, Professor Hamdani, to explain what this was. And he said this is basically something granting corporations free speech, so they have a right to be involved in politics. And then the third moving part is banned states. So states where some corporate political spending was prohibited. So the three of them are moving, right? So some firms have public ownership by public pension funds. Then there is before and after this court ruling. And then there are some states with and without bans, and they all start moving. So what the paper does is first look at excess returns around this court ruling for companies with and without public pension ownership, with and without political connections, and so on. And then they try to see what happens to political connections and lobbying following this court ruling, and what happens to equity stakes. So all of them are moving. It's a little bit difficult. So I guess maybe my most useful comment is that this is difficult to understand for an empirical paper, which I think I can usually still understand. So this is what I think the paper's main conjecture is. I hope this is correct. This court decision allowing everyone to be, or companies to be involved in politics, should have made corporate political activism easier or cheaper for all companies. So the political connections that these public pensions confer to the companies they invest in may have lost or should have lost some value. So their comparative advantage, to refer to Jörg's production function analogy, should have been eroded. And this is what I thought we should find in this paper. And so the first part is the authors look at what happens to excess returns around this court decision, and here the complications begin, I think. So there are the variables and then their interactions, and so it's a little bit difficult to understand. So Jörg has emphasized the third result, that companies with significant equity, try to watch me explain a triple interaction now. So companies with equity holdings by public pension funds lose value after the law. That is perhaps because they have lost their comparative advantage, but the standalone variables, the actual returns on companies with with equity stakes by public pension funds is actually positive, which is not quite significant, but I didn't understand why this is consistent with the story. And then there are all kinds of measures of political variables or connections, right? So one of them sort of works in the direction that Jörg has alluded to. So connections lose value, but then there are other types of corporate political activism, like lobbying, and connections is basically people on the board with political background. Lobbying and donations and a few other things don't work in the same direction. So I wasn't really certain why is it that the sort of standalone variables have these signs, and why is it that only connections work in the direction that should be consistent with loss of comparative advantage in forming political ties. Then in all the regressions, I don't know if you've had a chance to see this, there is a host of corporate governance variables, the GIM index, the Bebchuk E index, and so on. And he wasn't quite clear what are they doing there. So is this about, are these variables just control? Or was there an attempt to say that political activism is a governance problem? And so this part is not completely clear. So on the one hand, political connections may be part of the comparative advantage of these institutional investors. And on the other hand, in some parts, it sort of seemed like it may be a governance issue. These funds help former politicians find a place on the board of a company. So it's a little bit complicated, and it gets even more complicated when you include also these banned states before and after 2010, where political activism was not allowed before and it is allowed after. So I wasn't quite certain. Why is it that these public pension funds reduce their equity? See if I say this right. Anyway, it's complicated, so I won't even try, right? So anyway, there are other things moving there. So the first part is consistent sort of with the loss of comparative advantage. So these public pension funds reduce their equity holdings in banned states after the law. Here is the double interaction or triple, maybe because they are not good, they don't have an advantage in these ties anymore. But then it's sort of difficult to understand why they had more there to begin with. So the whole story is sort of a little, I think what this means is that before the ban, they had a comparative advantage in gaining ties in these states. Therefore, they had held more equity stakes there. And then after the ban is removed, there is no point, and then they sell. But that's my interpretation. Okay, I'll skip there. I mean, you understand that I had difficulties with the triple interaction. Let me just say the last point here. I mean, there is this, since Jörges alluded to this as a production function, so it would be interesting to know how this function works. So what is the relationship between or how are equity stakes determined jointly or in parallel with political connections? How do these funds operate, and how do they decide where to invest, where to form connections, and so on? Okay, this is a cheap one, but I'll say it nevertheless. So there is some effort invested in trying to understand the changes in political holdings of these funds after the legal change. But the actual levels of holdings are treated as something predetermined or exogenous. So it would sort of be nice to have some kind of a coherent story telling, you know, explaining better how all these parts sort of move together to form a production function. And I think this is my single, maybe I should have only showed this slide, because I was left sort of wondering what is the most important contribution of this paper? Is it just about the citizens' union and what happened to political connections before and after? If so, you know, this is a very U.S. specific question with a complex or complicated answer. So that's one possibility. Another interpretation of this paper is the whole discussion about the objective function and possible conflict of interest in public pension funds. So is it about what happens when you have public ownership of pension funds and how this affects the placement of politicians on boards and stuff like this? Maybe this paper is about the comparative advantage or different advantages of different institutional shareholders. Maybe this, I'm nearly done. Maybe this is about which institutional investors do what and how do they compete with each other. So I was basically left looking for this sort of general message which is not specific in time and location, something not just about citizens union, but about some of these more general questions, and maybe, make it easier for the uninformed reader to understand. So, thank you.
Some questions from the audience. Georg, are you ready for some questions?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I just, labor unions, what was the impact of Citizens United on contributions by labor unions? Were you control for that? Because I think it also removed the restrictions on contributions by labor unions, which, could have a big impact.
Okay, Anis.
I was wondering whether you were able to look at potentially the pension funds selling, which would seem like good news for the firms, right? So could you do another event study where when these blocks to being able to secretly spend and do whatever you want, because this is how they look like, right? Or how you think about them. So when you get rid of those for whatever reason, does the share price actually increase?
Okay, Andrew.
I want to build on what Yishay said on corporate governance structures. So if you think about a sort of matching that institutional investors, specifically these public pension funds, and randomly assigned to these firms, they are met. And they are going to take into consideration these corporate governance structures that then may have become important because of the transparency issue that you mentioned. So perhaps that single comment, you should sort of open it in the black box and see what is happening in which type of firms to see whether there are differential effects.
Okay, would you like to respond?
Yeah, sure.
I've not seen anybody, somebody?
Yeah, so I guess I have one question because you're trying to discuss the difference between state and federal regulation. Whether you looked at the location of the pension funds, you would think pension funds that are within the state, the headquarters state of the company would have political influence at the state level, and then when you remove the ban, now that effect is sort of dissipated by the fact that they're on an equal footing with pension funds out of state, CalPERS effect on an Illinois company, and you might, if you look at that, be able to sort of crystallize a little bit what the effect is that you're capturing.
And last question. This is yes.
You might want to talk with people from the public pension funds and ask them whether their sense is that their investment decisions are affected by this. My guess is that they would say no, and also when they tell you about the process, it would seem like it wouldn't be clear how this chance goes, because when they vote on governance or when they submit short proposals, they do take into account the preferences of local perspectives. But the investment decisions are made separately. Those are made in-house by general index. When they are not indexing, it's done by outside managers. And they would say that there is no communication of instructions like this. Under-invest or over-invest, depending on the state.
Okay, York.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you.
Give you 3 minutes to...
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, first of all, Yishay, for great comments. Thanks for various other questions. So maybe a couple of comments. So indeed, it's interesting to see that all political connections seem to matter, donations, lobbying doesn't seem to matter. This is consistent with earlier work in that donations seem to actually go back or fluctuate much more, seem to be much more opportunistic by companies than political connections are. Because there, if you have a politically connected guy also relating to one or the other party, this is much more long-term investment than donations,
which actually could go the one way or the other way, dependent on what exactly the political swing is or momentum is. So definitely, and thanks for pointing this out. We need to, if it's not clear, obviously it's up to us to make it clear what, and this is certainly one very important part. Now, on this labor unions, this is a very interesting point. Are these labor unions, how big are they in terms of their investments? Could they be, in terms of the donations they can provide? Is it something that could match, I don't know, and so we can check.
I assume one reason Obama was opposed to this decision is that corporations make larger donations than unions, right? Could be wrong.
Right. So okay, we'll look at this. So this question of random assignment, definitely we need to be clearer on that. And then the question on the state level. This is a very interesting point. So what we do is we look into connections on the connection side. We not only look into are they connected, but rather where does this connection originate? Is it on the state level, is it on the federal level, and so on. And in that sense, it would make sense exactly to connect it also to the pension side. So is it state, is it federal level? So thank you for this. And then for the public pension funds, definitely we should talk to them. The one thing we observe though, when you look at the shareholder meetings, it really seems to be that they are the ones who are now all of a sudden driving also the suggestions regarding the disclosure, the transparency of political spending. So yeah, so at least they seem to care about it. So now obviously we need to differentiate between those two parts.
What Christian is saying is it's actually different people at the pension funds making those decisions.
Yeah. So thanks for this suggestion. So again, thank you for the thoughts. We'll put them to the next version.
Thank you. We have a coffee break, a short coffee break right now.